friend of mine encouraged me to watch more of this lady who says she's a scholar, and I did. And as I guessed, she's using Gibbon. Now, I mean, I was thinking she was using a source borrowed from Gibbon or something like that, and she didn't know it. Now, let me tell you about something about scholarship. Oh, not to mention she buys into the dying and rising gods and Mithras and everything. Even though no one, even the atheists experience, most if not all atheists who are, if any, who are scholars or anything, won't use those because it's so embarrassing. She says it's been well documented. No, it's not. That's an urban myth. That's why I question the term she's using, scholar. Scholars, this is what scholars do. They don't read Gibbon. They may read Gibbon. I've read Gibbon, Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. And I think she is either borrowing sections of it or, again, relying on a book that talks about Gibbon. Gibbon lived or died 250 years ago. I think. I want to say 300, but I think about 250 years ago. Again, you know, I get the dates mixed, or, well, people reviews. I sometimes say 415 or 410 for the fall of the Roman Empire, or I might mix up Irenaeus of Lyon with, I might say Irenaeus of Antioch or Ignatius of Lyon. I transpose those two when talking, and it people catch that right away, and I think you mean this. Yeah. Scholarship, you go to primary sources and secondary sources, and even sometimes tertiary sources. Now, tertiary, well, I don't need to go into what those are, but primary sources are things like not the New Testament. The New Testament isn't a book. The various books and letters and apocalypses in the New Testament. You also read the Old Testament, and you also read Greek stuff and Roman stuff that came before the first century. And then you focus on stuff in the first century of what people were saying. You would read Philo, for example, because what grew up, what did this stuff rise up? What did this rise up in? And what came before that? What was the world like? What did they think? What were they reading? The people that wrote this. Then you would read the works of the New Testament again. Then you would read what sometimes gets called apocryphal stuff. And then you would go on to read people who wrote about those things and mentioned them, like the Church Fathers. And since it's about Christianity in Rome, you would go up through to Theodosius, at least. Now, this woman hasn't done this, and the one thing that shows that she's not a scholar, she still buys the dying and rising gods. Now, Horus is not a dying and rising god. Mithras never dies. Born of a rock. Born of a rock. You can argue that a rock is a virgin, but no. Horus gets reassembled and rules in hell. Attis dies, but actually it's proved that he's sleeping and his hair and fingernails still grow and his finger wiggles. Plus, Jesus, from an atheist perspective, Jesus is not a dying and rising God. Not even thought to be. So they say he didn't his followers didn't think that he was God until the 2nd century. That the writers of these works viewed him as the Messiah. And there's no precedent for a dying and rising Messiah. Because they take even with in the beginning was the word was in the beginning was the word, and the word was with God, and the word was God. That word, it's not rhema, it's logos. The ancient Greeks knew about this. They used logos. That was a concept to them. And then the Trinity. How can you call yourself a scholar and say that there was anything said about the Trinity at Nicaea? The Council of Nicaea had nothing to do with the Trinity. Nothing to do with the Trinity. You know the Nicene Creed that's said in Catholic churches and Anglican churches and Lutheran churches wasn't written or put together at Nicaea. It actually wasn't put together until much later, in between 700 and 1054. It was the Arian controversy they were worried about. Now, I go after KJV-onlyists, fundamentalists, all these people. Now, if people are going for a movement atheism or an atheism contra Christianity, that kind of thing, the fact that you'd have you tolerate piss poor history. If there was somebody making a video and they said, you know, we have a copy of every single book of the Bible from at least AD 70. The honest people, Christian, non-Christian, atheist, theist, would come out of the woodwork and say that's bullshit. We have a part of John that's from 115 to 130. That's amazing. We have people like Clement of Rome citing stuff in his work, actually using parts of Hebrews. We have people like Clement of Alexandria, and mind you, Clement of Alexandria is before Origen, and before Tertullian, and before Irenaeus. So we're talking old. I mean, before him there was Irenaeus or Ignatius of Antioch. See, I almost did it again. I want to see any scrap of evidence that the Virgin Mary was had anything to do with any pagan goddess, had any even attributes that any pagan goddess did, until after the year 1000. Now I could say after 500, because that would just crack her theory right open. And even that would prove my point. But after the year 1000. What from paganism was brought into Christianity? Or was brought not into Christianity, into the practices of different churches? I mean, I actually can tell you some of them. But I mean, this is an open challenge to any atheist. Or I guess question. Well, the challenge would be what from any form of paganism, whether it be Greek or Roman or what have you, was brought into Christianity. No, I keep saying Christianity, was brought into church practice, the question would be, do you know how the manuscripts of the New Testament, how the New Testament came down to us today? How accurate do we know it is? What do we know for sure about it? What do we know for sure was in it? How much has changed? And does anybody know the history between, let's say, approximately 200 BC to 410 AD? Because I do. I mean, I know. I mean, I've studied farther than that. I mean, much wider expanse of time than that. But there's something very questionable. There's something stinks when people claim to be for reason, for being rational, for being a skeptic, and letting shit slide just because, well, that would kind of help us. It's actually anti-intellectual, and it's lies, and it's bullshit and misinformation. But a stupid person might believe that. I mean, are you for people just being just having a lack of belief in a god, in a whatever, because that word God is pretty irritating to try to deal with, and still believe in things like ghosts and the earth being flat, and believing that it's a form of electricity, is a form of magic, and being against things like medicine. Because if we want to live in a more rational world, which I do, if we want to live in a world where doubt is encouraged and blind faith is not seen as something to be praised, which I don't think it should be. I think it should actually be an indicator of, whoa, that actually, now I actually kind of think less of you for that kind of thing. Although I don't want to sound that judgmental. We need to combat bullshit like this, because now you have your history, the history of mankind being fucked with, being rewritten. I mean, do you actually think Ancient Aliens is real history? Because this woman, and it's just a bunch of numbers and letters, who keeps calling herself a scholar, makes Ancient Aliens, look like what I mean, what could I compare it to? It makes Ancient Aliens look like high scholarship. Gibbon. I mean, when people talk about the James ossuary or the tomb of Jesus, that's an indicator of being like, wow, those have been horridly debunked. When they're relying on Gibbon and talking about the dying and rising gods theory, that shows what, I mean, how much of a scholar they are.